Hi there, YouTubers. I'm going to start another weaving project. It's going to be a set of cotton and dish towels or tea towels or whatever you want to call towels, So the goal is going to be about 26 inches wide by about 31 or 32 inches long for each towel. I'm going to put on enough warp that I should get 5 towels out of it, so I'm going to aim for about 5.5 yards of warp. That'll give me a little bit of loom waste, a little bit for shrinkage, and maybe a little bit for a small sample that's not a full towel. I'm going to show you a little bit of the warping process in this video. It's going to take multiple. I'm not going to show the whole process in one video, that's for sure. I'll probably just end this after I'm just doing some warping. My plan is for something with 5 different colors in the warp. So I had to really sit with my design program for weaving and with a spreadsheet to figure out the sequence in which I wanted to wind the warp threads so that I get them evenly distributed color-wise the way I want them across the loom. So I'm going to hold up the piece of paper that I printed from my spreadsheet program, and hopefully I can bring it in close enough that you can see. I think it's focusing. So I've got white and blue, light blue, red, and yellow for colors. And each of the columns here represents my plan for about 1 inch worth of warp thread counts. And then each of the rows represents the number of threads that I need to wind into that column. Then the next thing down is the total number of threads that will be in that column. And finally, there's just a number 1 through 28 or 29, the way I basically split it up. So that's my plan for warping. It's kind of a pain in the seat of the pants to do this because I'm constantly changing colors, but I think that's going to be the best way to spread the warp across the loom. The other thing to note is I know many people make big, huge chains of warp and then they spread it out. And I tend to be very different in the way I do my warp. I tend to use my warping board to measure out 1 inch's worth of warp threads at a time. I tie my little yarn knots around them so it doesn't get sort of spread all over the place. And then I go lay 1 inch worth onto the loom. It's a little bit more putsy, but I have found that for me, I get less tangles in the warp thread if I do it that way. So now let's take a quick look at the loom the way I've got it set up. Prepared for warping, I've got 1 inch worth of warp on the back of the loom already, but we'll take a look and see how I set up the Louette spring loom for warping. Okay, let's start at the top of the loom here. This is the built-in rattle that comes with the Louette spring loom. Okay, I don't use this built-in plastic rattle, this brown, dark brown stripe. I don't like it because the openings are too close together, and I tend to occasionally get little twists in the warp threads as it's going through there, and it can cause a breakage. So I built my own rattle. That's this one. It doesn't have set dividers. Instead, I know, well, you can see this. It's a little 1 inch cotter pin, and all I did was drill holes every inch into this board, and I set those cotter pins in at those 1 inch intervals for however wide I need to make my warp. So this batch of warp threads here is through the first cotter pin. Let's move you a little bit closer. Okay, so you can see this batch of warp threads just goes through, hangs over the bottom, and it's basically hanging onto the floor on the other side. Now let's aim the camera down just a little bit. So my lee sticks are here. Well, a lot of people have them everything going flat straight through. Well, that doesn't work for me because I'm warping over the top and I need an angle that's going to come up and down. It's not quite a 45-degree angle. So what I do is I take a piece of scrap yarn. I don't know if you can see it real well over here, but red scrap yarn, and it's through. I tie a couple of loops into it, and the lee sticks are just hanging there, and so is the metal bar that will be where the warp threads get tied on to the back beam. Then I just put the an inch worth at a time of warp thread onto the lee sticks in that metal bar. So I'll show you that when I get the next inch worth of thread ready to put on. There, we're zoomed in a little bit. I'm going to take and tie off just this small batch of threads and take them over to the loom. I tend to put a knot. Basically what I've got is little small chunks of yarn, really cheap stuff in multiple colors here, and I've tied one at the very tip end of where the yarn goes around the last peg. Then I'm going to tie one right through the cross to hold that in place. The next one's going to go, so we'll go about 1.5 yards over to here, maybe an inch or two less than 1.5 yards. Put in one little choke knot. We'll go down 2 yards, put in the next one, and finally down to the very beginning or end, depending on which perspective you're looking at it. There we have it. Because I tied off at the end, I'm going to snip off the yarn, and now we'll head over to the loom and put it on there. Okay, I've got a batch of thread here. Here's the chained end in my hand. I'm just going to take and throw that over the top of the loom and drop it down in the front of the loom. A little bit more. Then I've got the cross right here in my hand. I need to put it on the lee sticks, but to do that I need to aim the camera a little bit lower, so just a second. So I've got the cross here still in my hand. See it there? First thing I'm going to do is take the lee stick that will be the top one, the farthest, the one closest to the loom, farthest from the end of it, and I'm going to put it through. Then we'll lift that up out of the way. Then I've got, so that's through there. Now I've got this opening, this little loop that's left in the cross. I'm going to pick up the other lee stick and this rod that gets tied on to the back beam eventually, and I'm going to thread those two together. Pick this up, and I'm going to slide it all to the other end of the loom, which is my working area, and lay it through the rattle. So you can see that there's that batch of thread that I just put in. And now I've got This is the third one I've done. I had a problem with videoing the second one that had the multiple colors, so I showed you putting on the third one, which is back to blue again. Well, YouTubers, I've gotten all of the threads measured. They're hanging over the back of the loom. I'm in the process of tying them to this metal rod. They're still hanging, the lee sticks are still hanging by these pieces of yarn. I put a couple little styrofoam thingies in between the wooden back beam that's attached to the wind-up beam back here and this little metal bar, and I've wrapped around like this with this metal string. I wonder if I can zoom you in a little bit more. This string that's behind my fingers here. Whoops, wrong way. There you go. This string that's tied on here, not these colored ones. There, you can see it better right there, I think. Maybe if I go down even more. Okay, so that's tied on, wrapped around in between each bout of warp threads. And now I'm taking, and when I do this over by the warping board, I tie a piece of yarn around each of these batches of threads. So now I don't want it to be able to slide forward and backwards and not be attached properly at the back, and I don't like tying on with knots back here of the warp thread itself, because that just wastes warp thread. So now I'm going to take, in this case it's a red piece of yarn that I don't care about, and I'm tying a square knot around it, and I loop around the back a couple times, tie another square knot, and that securely attaches the end of one batch of threads, this one right here, to the metal rod that's attached to the wooden bar that is attached to the wind-up back beam. So that's where I've gotten so far. I've still got to tie them on all the way, rest of the way across over this way. But I think that's enough for this video. So I'm going to end it here. Let's bring you back up. Oh, you don't need to be focused on me like that. And I know it's kind of bright because the window's right back there, even though the sun's coming from the window on the other side of the room. Anyways, that's the end of this video on just measuring my warp and attaching it to the loom. When I work farther onto this project, maybe I'll do another video on it, hopefully in the not too distant future. So we'll catch you later. If you like my videos, by the way, I'd appreciate your subscribing. If you're already a subscriber, thanks a million, and we'll catch you the next time around on YouTube. Bye bye.